Hello, everyone. I'm Kristine Wildeboer. I'm one of the leadership fellows here in the Academy. And I want to talk to you today first about the Namaha Gay. Does anyone know the folk tale about the Namaha Gay from Japan? We have a new story for you. All right, so the Namaha Gay is a very fearsome creature. It has these red, bulging eyes, and its face is always in a scowl, so it's all wrinkled up and crinkly. It has this long kind of mane of hair around it, and these huge fangs that protrude over the lower lip. But this creature also has a message that teaches all Japanese children, and you're going to learn more about the Namaha Gay as we go forward. As a returning member of the Academy, I can tell you that many of our speakers speak to us from sort of that airplane view, that bird's eye view, that overview of everything that we want to learn about leadership. So we hear some recurring themes. Themes about communication, inspiring others, creating a vision, transferring that vision, and managing diverse workforces. We don't hear a lot about the practicalities. How are you going to go about taking that broad vision and actually applying it in your day-to-day life as a leader? So that's more my background. My background is rather extensive in higher education. I have an undergraduate degree in foreign service. I have 3 completed masters, management, accounting, and communications, and 3 in process, adult education, online instructional design, and a second language acquisition. So what I do constantly is take theories and apply them. Whether it's taking a theory about communication, having a case study about this happened at some company, what are you going to do with that theory and make fake conversations between the management and the employees to try to apply it? Or actually teaching in the classroom. I have more than 7 years of experience teaching adults. So it's taking those education theories and applying them. So what I want to talk to you today about is the same idea of taking examples that leaders face and going back to the same concept as a standard that you can apply to help you when you come into these issues that you're going to face. First, we're going to talk about communications. Second, ethics and values. And last, kind of everyday activities. So communication, one of my favorite areas. Here at the University of Grand Valley State University, I was a member of the Graduate Council Curriculum Committee for a while when I was a grad student here. And many of you probably have never heard of that, but just in the background here, all of your classes have a syllabus of record. And every academic program has to go through a vetting process through many layers of faculty and governance before it's going to become approved and a part of the university. This is one of the last stops in that process. So by the time we see a syllabus for a proposed course change or a new course, it's already been through at least 4 layers of faculty committees. So we've had all kinds of PhDs looking at it, and yet what do we do the majority of our time in that committee? Edit for grammar. The university has a standard. Everything in the permanent academic record has to be in APA format. That is not necessarily the standard of every academic discipline here at the university. So it's new for the faculty. So we have to expend the energy and the time to make sure it's always in that format, so that when you go back to that permanent record, what does it give you? It gives you a standard. You can always go back and translate it again. Whatever the APA rules were of that time, you can always go find that old guidebook and figure out what was that sentence, what was that grammar, why was that punctuation there. It's always going to be able to be translated and make sense. It's the same reason, just on a side note, international agreements are almost always also done in French. And that's because they consider French to be one of the least changeable languages. So linguistics will argue whether or not it's true, but that is the perception. You translate it into French because over time it will be the most translatable in the future also. So when you come to these situations, you want a standard of APA. So let's say you're a foreign student, or for whatever reason, you have to learn standard educated English. You're going to spend years learning it. You're going to spend a lot of effort to learn it. You come here, and you come across a website, a handout, an orientation brochure, something that's from the university, but it's not written in a standard. It's ungrammatical. The commas are not there. You don't know if it's a coordinate clause or subordinate clause. There's no commas. You don't know what's going on. The punctuation's a mess. It's a run-on sentence, or it's a phrase. It's not even a sentence. You're trying to figure out, you're trying to understand, what are you feeling? You're feeling like, why did I take all that time to learn the language so I could pass those tests? So I can get into college if this is what people are going to have as their official writing. Or you're going to feel like, well, who is this written for? You know, the majority of college students in the United States now are over the age of 30 and female. Now, if you wrote your whole thing in terms of 18-year-olds and you couched it all with, you know, football metaphors, as I once had a physics teacher do, are you really going to appeal to very many female students? Let me assure you that physics class had all of 3 females, okay? It was not appealing to a wide variety of people. It was very much so a subset of the population. And that's what happens. When you get away from that standard APA, you send a message. If this isn't something that you can understand and figure out, then we don't really want you as a part of our group. And then it's also going to bring up that question of values. If you're a higher education institution, don't you want to value having standard educated sounding language? So what are you saying to people when you go off into this very strange, slangy kind of language? And now marketers will go into it because they want to appeal to a subset of the population. But as a leader, you really want to think about, what can I do to appeal to the broadest range of people? How can I go about doing that? How can I get my message to everyone? Any thoughts? Okay. So, you know, to go back to that, you can have many standard choices. The U.S. federal government has actually a grammar guidebook. If you ever take a civil service exam, you will have access to it so you can understand what their grammar standards are, so that you will not only be able to understand the exam, but answer the questions. I'm yet to take an exam that did not include grammar questions. Because think about it, the U.S. government has to have a very standard language across all layers and levels and regions to ensure that everyone is understanding everyone else. So that's a key point. You know, the university uses APA, the government has their own version. Any company, and if you read advertising, if you read job announcements, you will often see companies cite which standard they want you to know if you're applying to be in communications or writing. Yes, Gleaves?
I'm just curious, is the federal government using a grammar that's based on K-Turanian or the Chicago style?
I would say it's based, to me, it's very APA. Okay. For example, the serial comma is APA. You absolutely have to have your comma in a series. AP is the only one that I know for sure has taken it out. But the government still has it. We still have it. Okay, APA still has it. So yeah, you want to keep those serial commas. Don't lose them. Okay. Yes. So that's one of the things. And it's one of the things that always comes up on the test too, I think. In part, just to check if you actually read their grammar book. Because if all you ever read is the newspaper, you might be thinking that serial commas have gone away. And they certainly have not. So yes, that is one of the things that comes in. So you want to make sure, the other point with having it standardized, how often, and for any of you who have studied foreign languages, have you noticed that everyone uses electronic translation now? Do you think whatever algorithms went into making that electronic translation are going to do very well if you're using something that's non-standard? You want to get into a standardized language, help out that translation, and whenever possible, don't use the word get. Last time I looked, it had at least 57 different meanings. Such fun to try to translate that word. So those are things you always want to think about when you're working with your different groups. So poorly written things are hard to translate. If you're using slang or some kind of more of a spoken grammar rather than a written grammar, and American English does have both, in case you hadn't noticed, then you're also going to often appeal to only a small group of people. And by appealing to a small group, you're excluding the other groups. And we almost never want to do that. And don't forget, you're also going to lose out on some of your demographics. You know, male, female, age, race, religion, background, regionalism, all of those issues get lost too. So always try to follow that standard language, and it'll help all of your communications as you're trying to inspire others to follow your vision. And you want to seek to make your communication encompassing and not divisive. Now take a minute to consider our many speakers here at the Academy and any of our other programs. Haven't you noticed that everyone uses a rather educated standard language? You know, they might tell you folksy tales of whatever happened in 18-something, but their language is pretty standard, and they always sound like they have an education. And if you're wondering what the marker is to sound like you're educated in the United States, it's the perfect tenses. If you can do your perfect tenses perfectly in writing and in speaking, you will sound like you have an education in the United States. We often don't even teach the perfect tense if you're not on the college track in high school. So that's one of those markers. If you're ever teaching a language course and your students want to test whether or not you know grammar, they're going to ask you questions about your perfect tenses. And then the passive voice is the second one. Now, remember our good friend, the Namaha Gay? Yes, indeed. Another important point about the Namaha Gay, he doesn't have just two horns. He has a whole circle of horns around its head, and that whole circle makes kind of a shallow bowl. There's more about that shallow bowl later, but you'll find out it's an important point. Okay, so now we're going to move on to how you can use the same concept when you run into a little bit of a crisis, kind of ethics and values and things that could come up in a company. Recently, a couple weeks ago here in Grand Rapids at the Economic Club, we had the CEO of PepsiCo come speak to us. At the end of the presentation, there was a question from the audience that had to do with character. And the person was asking about how to promote and maintain character among employees. And her answer touched very much so upon interculturalism. And what she said, and I thought it was very apropos, was to go back and look at the value statements, your mission statement, your vision statement of the company. From that, pull out, what are your corporate values? What are the standards of behavior that you expect for your employees? Once you've discovered what those are, start teaching them. Every year, every employee goes through training to remind them of what those standards of behavior are. And what the corporation says, no matter what goes on outside of these walls, no matter what the local culture and values and customs are, within this business, these are our standards. These are the standards that you will be held accountable for. These are our expectations. You're reminded about them constantly. You see them embodied in the leadership. You hear about them in training sessions. And the other thing she said, if someone breaks them, figuratively, publicly, behead them. Don't make any bones about it. If it's not working, and let them know that that is absolutely your standard. Think about how useful that is when you start looking at ethics and values in different cultures and how problematic that can become. You know, one country, one place, one location, something can be completely acceptable culturally, can be completely legal, and completely unacceptable somewhere else. But by going back to that same concept of standards, you've just created how you're going to solve the problem. You have the answer. So it's not as dramatic as some of the other crises that Gleaves is referring to, but it is in the same vein of ideas. Something comes up, let's go back and discover what it is in the standards that we can work with. At the same time, it can also be inspirational. You know, last year when we were working to put together Leadership U, one of the suggestions I made was let's go back to Grand Valley's mission statement. Part of our mission statement here at Grand Valley is educates students to shape their lives, their professions, and their societies. So the categories within Leadership University became personal, career, and community. So it reflects back, and it goes back and forth. So you have that connection to our central values that we as a community have decided here at the university, but it also gave you some automatic guidance. And so thinking back to those standards, check out what they are. You know, it's one of the reasons I hate blind job advertisements. It's like, I want to know what you think. What does your corporation stand for? What are you thinking? I want to be able to read your mission and your value statements. And a lot of places create them and kind of set them aside. So as a leader, it's really interesting to go back and think about what does this really say and how can I use that next time something comes up. So think about those things also. So you can start seeing how broadly this concept of using standards can be applied to allow you to be encompassing, across languages, across cultures, and pulling in everyone. And it can also provide guidance to deal with some of the thornier leadership issues that are going to come up, and to how to treat everyone equally and fairly. Set standards, train everyone on what those standards are, and stick to them. Return to the standards when things get complicated as a resource. A little more about the Namaha Gay, and then we're going to talk about every day. Now, the other thing you need to know about the Namaha Gay, it lives near bodies of water. Could be a river, could be a stream, could be a lake. It's never far from water. Because what does it have on the top of its head again? Anyone remember? A bowl, yes. And guess what's in the bowl? Water. It has to have water in that bowl. Otherwise, it will die very quickly, you see. You're already gaining what the secret hidden lesson of this folktale is. I can see it in your faces. All right. So if we're looking for practical ways to apply the broader leadership themes from our multiple speakers have touched upon, we talked about 2 different areas, and now we're moving on to everyday things. Now, many of you here I know are from the Academy, not everyone, but many of you here. You probably remember our opening orientation. We studied networking. And then at the January Mixer with Mentors, I did indeed hear someone use one of the standard phrases we were taught in the networking session at the beginning of the year. And that, again, is an example of how to apply those standards. We were given those standard sentences and phrases and ideas and ways of doing things, and then we can apply them into situations. So that's one example. Think about introductions. We're often taught about how to introduce people, in, out, up, down, however you're in different situations. But again, that gives you a standard of expectation so that when you introduce someone, they know, oh, this person's from outside the company, or they're from outside the country, depending on the situation. Oh, this person's of a higher rank than this person. Just the way that we format introductions and the way we do those things. By going back to that standard, we're imparting additional information, and we're also knowing how to act towards someone. How often do you introduce someone with, say, a religious title? A reverend or a father or a sister. And why would you do that, especially if it's not necessarily your religion? Because again, it's a clue. That standard of the title tells you how to react and act with that person. And that helps with our societal connections also. So that's one way to work with standards. And then with etiquette, we often have studied etiquette here in the Academy about formal eating, because we do a lot of formal eating events. And again, it lets us know what to do. Maybe you did, and maybe you didn't have that kind of Western etiquette training. We have international students, and our rules would be different from their rules. You could just come from a family that didn't do a lot of formal eating events. So teaching everyone that standard then lets everyone know what it is, and they can work together. And take a moment and think about it. How often have you gone into a situation and been able to look around and go, oh, okay, I had no idea what I was walking into, but this looks sort of like whatever. So I think I'm supposed to act like this. It works a lot better when you're in a culture and a country you're familiar with, because when you go overseas, you get a lot more of those, oops, I made a big mistake situations. You just never quite know what you're walking into, and we've all had those. But the United States is so cognizant of how diverse we are. We embody it in small and different ways. How often have you seen, say, restrooms or locker rooms that don't just have a word, but a symbol for what they're supposed to be, or a color, some kind of other representation to help people out? How often do our doors say push or pull? I've made the mistake before of sliding a door the wrong way, and you're supposed to go that way, and you ended up on the male side instead of the female side, and how it goes. So it's, these things happen. But here in the United States, we tend to teach people things from the get-go that are very translatable. A circle with a line through it is a no. Whether it's no smoking or no drinking or no eating or no parking, we use that a lot, that same symbolism. Standards are also often used in the classroom. Think about it. I already told you there's a syllabus of record that's going to exist. It's going to say, we're going to teach these 10 concepts in this class. How every individual professor organizes those 10 concepts can vary. But what you're going to do with each time is those 10 concepts. If you as a student fall behind and you only learn 5, well, you failed the class. The teacher doesn't then dumb the entire class down to teach just those 5 concepts. The class is taught to a standard. And you either keep up or you don't. And now there are instances, of course, where that isn't the truth, but very often in adult education, that is the number one thing we do. We work with standards. So now getting back to our Namaha Gay, let's see if you have learned your lessons. So our Namaha Gay folk tale, what does the Namaha Gay look like? Scary monster, yes, okay. And what does the Namaha Gay have on its head? A bowl. And what's in the bowl? Water. So you are a small child, and you have come wandering out into the area, and you come across the Namaha Gay. What are you going to do to save yourself from the Namaha Gay? Drink the water. You're a small child. It's a scary monster. You're in Japan. What do you do in Japan to greet someone? Bow. What's going to happen as soon as the animal bows? Water's going to run out. And so where does the animal going to go? Running back to the water. And what can you as a small child do? Run in the other direction. So the first lesson is the standard of greeting in Japan is taught very simply by that folktale right there. Anytime you meet anyone, any situation, whatever it is, you don't know what to do, bow. Second one, stay away from rivers, lakes, and streams and such, and you won't run into any Namaha Gay because they're only by the water, remember? So that's always a useful thing to teach small children too. Right? So, in conclusion, we've all had many presentations about leadership. They're generally a bird's eye view. And what I wanted to do was to bring things down and talk about how to apply some of these bird's eye things using the standard concept of standards. And by using that in different situations, it can help you get through. So communication, choose a standard. Could be APA, could be federal government, could be whatever you want it to be. But try to choose a standard, use it all the time. People know what to expect. They know how to translate it. They can work through that. If you're looking at a corporation, you're looking at an intercultural situation, try to find a standard values, standard ethics, standards of behavior that you're going to have for everyone, regardless of their background. And by that way, you bring everyone in, you treat them equally and fairly. And don't forget the value of lessening the misunderstandings and creating cohesiveness among the group by using standards that everyone can learn and understand and apply.